The silver fork hovered halfway to my lips, the heavy scent of roasted turkey and sage stuffing suddenly turning my stomach. Under the crisp white linen tablecloth, something brushed against my knee. I glanced down, expecting to see the family dog begging for scraps, but instead I saw a small, trembling hand sliding a folded napkin toward me. I looked up and met the eyes of my 11-year-old granddaughter, Lily. Usually, her face was a beacon of joy, a canvas of dimples and bright smiles, especially on Christmas Eve. But tonight, her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed too large for a child to hold. I smiled at her, a reflex born of 74 years of comforting others, assuming she had drawn me another one of her charming doodles. She was always slipping me secret notes, usually drawings of cats or hearts labeled with "Best Nana." I took the napkin, keeping my movements subtle under the table, and unfolded it. The ink was smeared slightly, as if she had written it in a frantic rush, but the message was stark and legible in her looping cursive. "Nana, pretend you are sick. Leave now. They are doing it tonight." For a heartbeat, the world simply stopped. The chatter around the dining table faded into a dull, underwater roar. I stared at those words, written in blue ballpoint ink, and felt the blood drain from my face. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked up, my gaze drifting to the other end of the long mahogany table. There sat my son, Robert, and his wife, Caroline. They were laughing at something Caroline's father had said, raising their crystal wine glasses in a toast that I suddenly realized I hadn't been listening to. The candlelight danced in the ruby liquid of the wine, casting long, flickering shadows across their faces. To an outsider, it was the perfect tableau of a happy, affluent family, enjoying a holiday feast. But through the lens of Lily's terrified note, the scene distorted. Robert's smile looked tight, practiced. Caroline's laughter sounded shrill and hollow. I looked back at Lily. She gave a microscopic nod, her eyes darting toward her parents, and then back to me, pleading. That look, so full of fear and urgency, shattered my denial instantly. I didn't know the specifics, but I knew my granddaughter. She was an honest soul, incapable of deceit. If she was this scared, I was in danger. I set my fork down on the fine china with a deliberate clatter. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, feigning a gasp. "I'm not feeling well," I murmured, letting my voice waver. The sensation wasn't entirely an act. The sudden surge of adrenaline made me feel lightheaded and nauseous. The conversation ceased instantly. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward me. "Oh, honestly, Mother," Robert sighed, dropping his napkin onto his plate. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed. It was the tone one uses for an unruly child or a malfunctioning appliance. "It's Christmas Eve. We haven't even served the pudding yet." Caroline leaned toward him, whispering something behind her hand, but her eyes remained fixed on me, cold and calculating. I saw a flicker of a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I think I need to go home," I said, pushing my chair back. The screech of the wooden legs against the floorboards sounded violent in the quiet room. It's been a very long day, and my chest feels tight. No one moved. No one offered to help me up. Not Robert, the boy I had nursed through chickenpox and broken bones. Not Caroline, whom I had welcomed into my family with open arms and a grandmother's heirloom ring. Not her parents, who'd been drinking my wine and eating my food for the last 3 hours. They just sat there, watching me with a strange, predatory stillness. Except for Lily. She scrambled out of her chair, nearly knocking it over. "I'll walk Nana to her car," she announced, her voice high and breathless. Caroline's hand shot out to grab Lily's arm. "Sweetheart, sit down. Nana can walk herself out. We are about to open the special gifts." Lily pulled her arm away, a flash of defiance in her eyes that I had never seen before. "Please, Mom, just for a minute." "She's shaking." That was the moment the dynamic shifted. I saw Robert and Caroline exchange a glance, a quick, silent communication that spoke volumes. Robert waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, hurry back. Don't dawdle in the cold." I stood up slowly, gripping the edge of the table for support. My legs felt like lead, heavy and disconnected from my body. The room felt suffocatingly warm, the scent of pine and cinnamon suddenly cloying and sickening. As I walked toward the heavy oak front door with Lily's small, warm hand gripping mine, I could feel their gazes boring into my back. They were watching, waiting, like vultures perched on a wire. The winter air hit me like a physical blow when we stepped onto the porch. It was a crisp Vermont night, snow piled high against the railings, the sky a vast dark dome scattered with indifferent stars. The cold was sharp and clarifying, stripping away the fog of the warm dining room. Lily didn't let go of my hand. She pulled me down the steps, her boots crunching on the salted path, moving with an urgency that terrified me. "Nana," she whispered, looking over her shoulder at the glowing windows of the house. They were talking in the library before dinner. They didn't know I was in the window seat behind the curtains. My heart was thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "What did they say, darling? Tell me exactly." "They said, after tonight, you wouldn't be living in the manor anymore." Her voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. "Dad said they found the papers, that you signed something last week. They said the notary is coming at 8 o'clock. I stopped dead in my tracks next to my sedan. The motion sensor light above the garage flickered on, bathing us in a harsh, clinical white glare. "Papers?" I repeated, my mind racing. "What papers? I haven't signed anything, Lily." She shook her head frantically, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "They said you're losing it, Nana. They said you're forgetful, that you don't know what day it is. Caroline told her mom that once the transfer is complete tonight, they can finally put you in that facility in Burlington. The one they visited last month. A facility." The word hung in the freezing air like a cloud of poison. They wanted to put me in a home, me, Evelyn Moore. I still ran the local historical society. I did the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen every Sunday. I managed my own investments. They said the house, the manor, is too big for you, Lily continued, wiping her nose on her mitten. They said it's an asset that's wasting away. Caroline said they already have a buyer lined up. A developer who wants the land, the manor, my home, the Victorian estate. My late husband, Arthur, and I had bought 40 years ago. The house where we had raised Robert. The house where Arthur had died in his sleep, safe in his own bed. The house that held every memory, every triumph, and every tragedy of my life within its walls. They wanted to sell it to a developer. To tear it down for what? Condos? A strip mall? And then Lily said the thing that made my blood run cold. Dad said he has the medical evaluation. He said Dr. Evans signed it. He said, "You're legally incompetent, Nana." I felt a wave of dizziness that had nothing to do with the cold. Dr. Evans, my primary care physician for 20 years. Suddenly, the pieces slammed together in my mind, forming a grotesque picture. The routine checkup last month that Robert had insisted on driving me to. I remembered how Caroline had come along, how she had answered questions for me, how she had joked about my senior moments when I couldn't recall the name of a specific actor in a movie. I remembered Dr. Evans asking me strange questions, counting backwards from 100, naming the current president, identifying objects on a tray. I had laughed it off, thinking it was just standard protocol for a woman of my age. I had answered everything correctly, or so I thought. But if Robert had influenced him, if they had twisted my words, they had been planning this for months. "Nana?" Lily tugged on my hand. "You have to go. The notary is coming soon." I looked down at this brave little girl, shivering in her velvet holiday dress and winter coat. She had betrayed her parents to save me. That kind of courage was rare in adults, let alone children. I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees, and gripped her shoulders. "You did the right thing, Lily," I said, my voice fierce and steady. "You are the bravest girl I know. You saved me tonight." She threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my coat. "I don't want you to go away, Nana. I don't want them to take your house." "They won't," I promised her, pulling back to look her in the eye. "I swear to you, they won't take a single thing. Now listen to me. You have to go back inside. Tell them I was confused. Tell them I was crying and disoriented. Can you do that?" She nodded, sniffing. "Why?" "Because they need to think their plan is working. They need to think I'm weak. It buys me time." She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded again. "I can do it." I watched her walk back toward the house, her small figure silhouetted against the warm, deceptive glow of the windows. Once the door closed behind her, I got into my car. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use 2 hands to insert the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:15 p.m. The notary was coming at 8. I didn't drive home immediately. I drove to a scenic overlook about a mile down the road, killed the engine, and sat in the dark. I needed to scream, but I couldn't. The betrayal was too deep, too profound for noise. My own son, the boy I had read bedtime stories to, the teenager I had taught to drive, the man I had supported through 2 failed business ventures and a messy divorce before he met Caroline. He looked at me and saw nothing but a barrier to his inheritance. He saw a dollar sign. He saw a nuisance. I thought about Arthur. I missed him with a fresh, agonizing pang. Arthur would have known what to do. He would have roared like a lion. But Arthur was gone, and I was alone. Or was I? I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back were old. Yes, there were lines etched by laughter and sorrow, but they were not the eyes of a senile woman. They were the eyes of a survivor. I had buried a husband. I had beaten breast cancer. I had managed a household and a career. I was Evelyn Moore, and I would not be erased. I drove home. The manor loomed in the darkness, a grand old dame of a house with its turret and wraparound porch. I parked in the garage and let myself in. The silence of the house usually comforted me, but tonight it felt heavy with the threat of loss. I walked through the entryway, my fingers trailing along the wainscoting Arthur had installed himself. I went into the kitchen, the heart of the home, where the copper pots hung above the island. I made myself a cup of strong black tea. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp on the desk in the corner of the kitchen where I paid my bills. I sat down and pulled out a legal pad. I began to write. I wrote down everything Lily had told me. I wrote down the dates of the doctor's appointment. I wrote down the times Robert and Caroline had visited recently, bringing documents for me to sign. Insurance forms, they had said. Just routine updates. I realized now I had likely signed things I shouldn't have, trusting my son implicitly. I sat there until dawn, formulating a plan. I didn't sleep. Sleep was for people who were safe. The next morning was Christmas Day. My phone rang at 9 a.m. It was Robert. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, his voice thick with fake cheer. "We were so worried about you last night. You ran off so quickly." "I'm sorry, dear," I said, injecting a tremble into my voice. I felt so confused. The noise, the lights. I just needed to lie down." There was a pause. I could almost hear him smiling. "That's okay, Mom. We understand. You know, we really need to talk about your living situation. It's becoming clear that living alone is too much for you." "We can talk about it later," I said vaguely. "I'm just going to rest today." "Okay, we'll come by tomorrow. Caroline and I want to bring you some leftovers and discuss some things." I hung up. Tomorrow. That gave me 24 hours. The day after Christmas, banks and law offices reopened. I was parked in front of the First National Bank of Vermont at 8:55 a.m. When the doors opened, I walked straight to the office of Mr. Henderson, the branch manager who had handled my accounts for 30 years. Mrs. Moore. He stood up, smiling. I hope you had a lovely Christmas. I didn't return the smile. I need to secure my accounts, Philip. Immediately. He saw the look on my face and ushered me into a chair. What's happened? I explained everything. The overhead conversation, the threat of the power of attorney, the medical evaluation. Philip listened, his expression darkening with every sentence. This is grave, Evelyn, he said quietly. If they have a power of attorney, even if it was obtained under dubious circumstances, they can freeze your assets. They can drain your accounts. Block them, I said. I want two-factor authentication on everything. I want a note on my file that no transactions are to be authorized without me physically present with identification. And I want to move the bulk of my liquid assets into a new account that Robert doesn't know exists. Consider it done, he said, typing furiously. But Evelyn, you need a lawyer, a shark. I have one in mind, I said. My next stop was the office of Sarah Sterling. She wasn't my usual estate attorney. She was a litigator known for her ruthlessness in corporate disputes. She was expensive, intimidating, and exactly what I needed. She listened to my story without interrupting, tapping a silver pen against her desk. When I finished, she leaned back. So, they want to play dirty, she said, a cold smile playing on her lips. They want to use a medical evaluation to declare you incompetent and trigger a power of attorney. Do you have a copy of this evaluation? No, I said. But they claim Dr. Evans signed it. Sarah picked up her phone. I'm going to get you an emergency appointment with a geriatric psychiatrist, an independent specialist, the best in the state. We are going to get a counter-evaluation immediately. If you are as sharp as you seem, we will have medical proof of your competency dated after theirs. That renders their evaluation moot. And the house? I asked, my voice wavering for the first time. We're going to put the house into a revocable living trust, she said. Today. You will be the sole trustee. Even with a power of attorney, they cannot touch assets inside a trust without the trustee's specific permission. We'll lock that house down so tight they couldn't pry a loose brick from the foundation. We worked through lunch. I signed papers until my hand cramped. I underwent a 3-hour cognitive assessment with the specialist Sarah found, answering questions until my brain felt fried. But the result was unequivocal. I was fully competent, highly intelligent, and showing zero signs of dementia. By 4:00 p.m., I was back at the manor. I was exhausted, but I felt armored. I had my shields up. Now I just had to wait for the attack. Robert and Caroline arrived at 5:30 p.m. They didn't knock. They just used the spare key Robert had kept since he was a teenager. I was sitting in the living room waiting for them. I had a fire crackling in the hearth, and I was sipping tea, looking deceptively fragile in a knitted shawl. "Mom," Robert called out. "We're here." "In here," I replied softly. They walked in, bringing a gust of cold air with them. Caroline was carrying a heavy accordion folder. Robert held a casserole dish. "We brought dinner," Robert said, setting the dish on the coffee table. "But first, we really need to handle some paperwork." Caroline sat down opposite me, not bothering with pleasantries. She opened the folder and began laying out documents. The table was soon covered in legal paper. "Evelyn, look," she began, her voice taking on that condescending, slow cadence. "We've been very worried about your episodes. The confusion at Christmas dinner was the last straw. We spoke to Dr. Evans. He agrees that you need assisted living." I sipped my tea. "Is that so?" "Yes, Mom," Robert said, sitting beside his wife. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "We've found a wonderful place. It's safe. You won't have to worry about the house anymore. It's too big, too dangerous for you." "And the house?" I asked. "What happens to the manor?" "We'll handle that," Caroline said quickly. "We'll sell it and the money will go toward your care. It's very expensive, you know." She pushed a document toward me. This is the transfer deed, and this affirms the power of attorney you signed last week. We just need you to initial these pages to finalize the move. The notary is waiting in the car. We can bring him in once you've reviewed these." I looked at the papers. I looked at my son. He was sweating slightly despite the cold. He knew this was wrong. He knew he was betraying his father's memory, betraying me. But greed is a powerful drug. I reached into the tote bag beside my chair. "I have some papers for you to look at, too," I said, my voice dropping the waver, becoming clear and hard as diamond. I pulled out the freshly minted medical report from the independent specialist and slapped it onto the coffee table on top of their transfer deed. "What is this?" Caroline asked, frowning. "That is a psychiatric evaluation conducted 4 hours ago," I said. "It states that I am of sound mind, possessing superior cognitive function for my age. It specifically refutes any claims of dementia or incompetence." Robert stared at the document. "Mom, what did you do?" I pulled out the second document, the trust agreement. "And this," I continued, my voice rising with the fire of justice, "is the deed to this house. As of 2 p.m. today, the manor and all its contents belong to the Evelyn Moore Living Trust. I am the sole trustee. You cannot sell it. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot touch it." Caroline's face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. You can't do that. We have power of attorney." I pulled out the third document, a letter from Sarah Sterling sent via courier to their lawyer an hour ago, revoking any and all previous powers of attorney, citing coercion and fraud. "I can, and I did," I said. "And furthermore, I have spoken to Mr. Henderson at the bank. My accounts are locked. If you try to access them, the police will be notified immediately." Robert stood up, his face a mask of shock. "Mom, why are you doing this? We're your family." "Family?" I stood up then, shedding the shawl. I felt 10 feet tall. Family doesn't plot to throw their mother into a facility so they can cash in her assets. Family doesn't lie to doctors to get a false diagnosis. Family doesn't steal. "We weren't stealing," Caroline shrieked. "We were protecting the inheritance. It's ours eventually anyway." And there it was, the ugly, naked truth. "It is not yours," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "It is mine. I earned it. Arthur and I built this life. You didn't build anything. And as of today, I have instructed my lawyer to redraft my will." Robert flinched as if I had slapped him. "Mom, don't say that. You are out, Robert," I said. "I am leaving everything to a trust for Lily. She will get it when she turns 25. Provided you and Caroline have absolutely no access to it." "Lily," Caroline spat the name. "She's a child. She's the only honest person in this family," I retorted. "She warned me, Robert. She told me everything." Robert looked at his wife, then back at me, horror dawning on his face. "Lily told you?" "Yes. Your daughter has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body." I pointed to the door. "Get out of my house." "Mom, please, let's talk about this," Robert pleaded, stepping toward me. I reached for the landline phone on the side table. "I'm calling the police in 10 seconds. I will tell them there are intruders in my home who are refusing to leave. Do not test me, Robert. You know I never make empty threats." He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. He didn't see the old woman he thought he could bully. He saw his mother, the woman who had disciplined him, raised him and loved him, and who was now looking at him with absolute crushing disappointment. "Come on," Caroline grabbed his arm. "She's crazy. Let's go. We'll fight this in court." "You will lose," I said calmly, "and you will bankrupt yourselves trying." They left. The door slammed shut, echoing through the large, empty house. I locked the deadbolt. Then I slid the chain into place. I walked back to the living room and looked at the casserole dish they had left. I picked it up and walked to the kitchen, dumping the contents into the trash. I washed the dish, dried it, and set it aside to return to them later. I would not owe them even a dish. The adrenaline crashed then. I sank onto the kitchen floor, burying my face in my hands, and wept. I didn't cry for the house, or the money, or the fear. I cried for my son. I mourned the boy he used to be, the curly-haired toddler who used to bring me dandelions. I mourned the relationship that was now irretrievably broken. The son I loved was gone, consumed by greed and a toxic marriage. That was a death more painful than a funeral, because the body was still walking around. But as the tears subsided, I felt something else rising beneath the grief. Peace. I was safe. I had defended my home. I had defended my dignity. The next few months were ugly. There were angry letters from lawyers, threatening voicemails, and silence from Robert. But Sarah Sterling was a fortress, and their threats shattered against her legal defenses like waves against a cliff. Eventually, they gave up. The cost of fighting me was too high, and the evidence of their attempted fraud was too damning. I didn't see Robert or Caroline again, but I saw Lily. I arranged it through the lawyers. Since I was funding her future trust, I stipulated that I required visitation rights. Caroline was too greedy to refuse the potential money, so she agreed. Every other weekend, a car service brought Lily to the manor. We spent those weekends baking cookies, working in the garden, and reading in the library. We never talked about her parents. We didn't need to. We built our own world, a sanctuary of trust and love. One afternoon in late spring, we were planting hydrangeas in the garden. The sun was warm on our backs, the earth smelling rich and fertile. Lily looked up from the soil, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Nana," she asked. "Yes." "Darling, are you lonely here? In this big house, all by yourself?" I stopped digging and looked up at the manor. The sunlight glinted off the windows. It stood tall and proud, weathering the storms, just like me. I looked back at my granddaughter. Her eyes were the same shade of blue as Arthur's had been. "No, Lily," I said softly. "I'm not lonely. I have my memories, I have my garden, and I have you." She smiled, that bright, dimpled smile that lit up the world. "And I have something else," I added, patting her hand. "I have the truth, and the truth is the best companion you can have. It keeps you warm at night when lies leave you cold." She nodded, understanding beyond her years. We went back to planting, digging our hands into the earth, nurturing life, growing something beautiful out of the dirt. I realized then that family isn't just about blood. Blood is just biology. Family is about loyalty. It's about who stands beside you when the storm comes. It's about who hands you the napkin under the table when the wolves are at the door. My son had forgotten that lesson, but I would make sure Lily never did. And as I watched her watering the new blooms, I knew that the manor and my legacy was in good hands. I had saved my home, but more importantly, I had saved the future. And that was worth every tear, every battle, and every ounce of strength I had left.